Hello everyone, you keep asking me the question, can I get a green card to a marriage if my asylum application is pending? Today is the day that we finally break this down. Bear with me, let's get to it. Okay, so first of all, we need to lay some context. Marriage cannot be just any marriage. It cannot be on paper. It is never a good idea to get married for immigration purposes. Now, don't get me wrong. One of your intentions to getting married could be immigration purposes, but the problem is it cannot be the only one. It cannot be a marriage just for immigration purposes. It is okay to desire a green card, for that to be a motivation to get married, but it has to be a real marriage. Usually the process, one way or another, takes a long time. Believe me, it's always a bad idea to get into a fake marriage because it always ends up in a bad way. Believe me when I say that. First of all, let's start with that. Sound, real marriage. Now, this marriage has to happen with a US citizen. And the reason for that is an exception in the law. When I say exception, it's because of the way it is designed. Unfortunately, but in reality, that exception is the rule, is the norm, because most of the green card applications are based on immediate category, based on a marriage to a US citizen. So don't get me wrong when I say exception, but this exception opens the door because unlike regular adjustment of status, regular green card application, if the category is immediate category, if the category is parent of a US citizen spouse petition, you don't have to be in status. The only requirement you're supposed to have is to be inspected and admitted or paroled into the United States. Now, what does that mean? Let's break it down. Inspection and admission or parole are terms of art in the immigration world. We can simplify it by saying if you have a visa, you apply to be admitted to the United States and they look at your paperwork, they accept you, they admit you based on that visa. That means you're admitted. If at some point, it doesn't matter if it was many years ago, it doesn't matter if it was with a tourist visa, it doesn't matter if it was through another type of visa, as long as it was not frivolous, as long as you were not using someone else's passport, faking your way through or making a misrepresentation, if you're admitted or paroled, parole is something similar. Again, someone is legally, they're inspected to a certain degree and then they're let into the country. They're not admitted, they don't have a status like a student visa or a tourist visa, but because of the circumstance they're in, like the Afghans, the Venezuela, humanitarian parole programs, they are let into the country. So if this happens, it doesn't matter how long it passes, it doesn't matter if they lose their status, it does not matter if they work without authorization. If later they're sponsored by a US citizen child or a US citizen spouse, they can get their green card, no problem. Now let's talk about a little bit more complicated situations. What about if we're dealing with someone who had to go through immigration court proceedings? If someone has a pending immigration court case, that does not mean that they don't get a green card. They can. It's just the authority that's going to decide that green card application, the I-485, is different. In the first case, for someone without court, it was the USCIS. In this case, the application is going to be decided by an immigration judge. Same application, different dynamics, different procedures. Now, usually someone in immigration court proceedings, it could be a long time ago. You could have an order of removal pending. You might need to do a motion to reopen, but same dynamics in terms of admission, inspected and admitted, or paroled applies. So what happens if you're dealing with someone who came through the border illegally, so-called illegal entry? Now, the picture is not as clear as you might think. Politicians might like you to think, media might want you to think. The reality is completely different. The government is in a position to argue that if you entered without inspection, automatically you are disqualified. You are not admitted. NTA, notice to appear starting court proceedings, that says you are an alien present in the United States unlawfully. But in reality, that might be different because especially in the recent years, around 2022, 2023, the last administration's policies were allowing people to cross the border in a controlled manner because they did not want to, in one hand, they wanted the people to come in. That was really interesting. because they needed people. They needed the cheap labor, excuse my language. But unfortunately, they didn't want people to have status, right? They didn't want to upset other political affiliated parts of the population. So they had people come in a controlled way. And they wanted to keep the option of arguing that they're here illegally. But in reality, that was not the case. So that's something we can challenge. And I'm willing to do that for many of my clients. And the reason for that is you don't get to, exploit people and then put them in a position and then, just because it benefits you. I'm not okay with that. I'm going to challenge that. Now, what happened was, especially around 2022, 23, they let people in a controlled way. The officers were literally seeing them come in and then processing them. Now, the next step is very important because for us to be able to argue that this was in fact a parole, in other words, qualifies that individual to get his or her green card in the United States, the way that individual is released is very important. Sometimes ICE outright exercises parole. They in fact issue a documentation accounting for the parole. It lists humanitarian parole. If that's the case, you're good. You have nothing to worry about. We can easily use that to argue your admission circumstances, your entry qualifies for the green card. Now, sometimes that's not the case. There is no parole documentation. In this case, if that individual is released on a bond decision by an immigration judge, unfortunately, that doesn't qualify for adjustment of status purposes. That's not something we can argue as parole. So what is left is when someone enters and then ICE releases them on their own. They don't qualify this, they don't document this as parole, but if the circumstances are appropriate for us to argue that what happened in fact is parole, there is case law that we can rely on to successfully argue, then that individual might get his or her green card in the United States without resorting to leaving the country, getting a provisional waiver, going through consular processing, which is very, very risky, unfortunately. Now, the situation is very complicated. If you think that you or someone you know can benefit from, an inquiry into these circumstances, have them reach out to us. Our contact information is in the detail. We're more than happy to look into their circumstances and see if there is anything that can be done. But like I said, it's not black or white. It's not very simple. It's very technical. If there is a way to fight, we will fight for you and we will get you your green card. That's my job and that's my promise for you. Just like many of my clients that I'm helping, I'm more than happy to look into your situation and fight for you as well. Keep following us. Stay in touch with us for similar updates. Thank you for watching.